Guys, today we are here with Genito Ribeiro dos Santos, who is a journalist and documentarian. We are in Barra do Garças, Mato Grosso, and he is going to share a little bit of his experiences with us, right? And reports you even filmed unidentified flying objects here in Mato Grosso. See? Thank you for being here, Genito. I've even watched your documentary. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Edison, I'm the one who should thank you for coming to Barra do Garças. I was really curious to meet you because I've seen you on several podcasts and shows, right? And it's always a very interesting topic which draws a lot of attention and that people are really interested in, especially nowadays, right? And speaking of Barra do Garças, Edison, we're here in a part of Brazil that has a high incidence of unidentified flying object cases. It's a place where if you haven't seen it yourself, you know someone who has, right? And so it's a recurring topic. It's no coincidence that this city has the world's first area reserved for unidentified flying object landings with a bill approved unanimously. It was a law proposed by the historian, the late Valdão Varrão, right? Back in the 1990s. So, when it comes to ufology, Barra do Garças is a part of Brazil that really draws a lot of attention.
And you personally, have you ever seen this phenomenon in the skies here in Mato Grosso?
Music well said by you, phenomenon, right? Because as journalists, we don't deal with superstition. We deal with facts. And after witnessing these things so many times, hearing the stories, I went out into the field to learn a little more. And in fact, Barra do Garças is a different place. This is a place of opportunities where, if you pay a little attention, you can see many unidentified flying objects. Now, for this to happen, for me to get interested in a way that I wouldn't back away from this subject,
It's pretty striking there, isn't it?
striking. I had to have a very interesting experience. And that was back in 2007. I had a television show in the city, and we used to go out into the mountains around the region because our area is very beautiful with many waterfalls and lots of rock formations. And these rock formations attract attention. And I wanted to make some material back in 2007 about that, about the beauties of Barra do Garças, about the rock formations of Serra do Roncador. And there we had an indescribable surprise. I'll leave it at that. Why? A huge object. I'm giving you this image for you to insert. This is a drawing that was made by me because I'm a visual artist. That's because we didn't have the reaction to film or photograph anything, because of the fear we felt when this object followed us for about 3 minutes. It was a drawing that...
In which region did the event happen?
This happened at the top of Serra do Roncador in the region of the Vale dos Sonhos district, which is 65 kilometers from Barra do Garças. Of course, we were a little further ahead in the Serra do Roncador. We were filming on some farms at the top of the mountain. That's when, around 8:30 at night, something like that, we were surprised by this object, which at first was far away like a light. Then it got closer and came over us, and it was something big. I'll estimate for you here. It was about the size of a moving truck, one of those smaller trucks. And it came very close, about 50 meters away. It didn't make any kind of sound, but I felt a very strong pressure in my ears. And it had this body, as you can see in the image, yellowish, orange, reddish, that looked like a living material. It wasn't something that blinked like a light, but it was something that moved as if it were gelatin. Let's imagine.
As if it were a light contained within a certain structure.
Exactly. But let's suppose you put a light behind some gelatin and you shake the table. It's a comparison. It would be more or less...
And did it scare you at the time?
A lot of fear. There were 5 of us, including myself, obviously, right? My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, a friend of mine who works in the healthcare network here, Adonias Coelho Raimara, who now lives in Brasilia, and her brother, Gretson. We were there producing this material, and we were caught by surprise. So, this story went even further because after that sighting, a year later, the president of the association, Mato Grosso Association for Ufological and Psychic Research, Ataide Ferreira, came here to Barra do Garças. And in his research, he wanted to know more, a bit about this story. In fact, he appears in this photo. And if we're talking about 2007, I was much younger, and so was he, obviously, right? I'm showing him this object. And it even became a topic in Unidentified Flying Object magazine, right? About this subject. And we were there in 2008. The episode happened in 2007. A year later, in 2008, we were at that same place, and once again, we were surprised. Even Ataide was extremely excited about all that, right? It was a state of ecstasy because it didn't appear to us with the same intensity, but it was something. A huge light appeared in the sky. And then Rubens Machado and I, who were with me in the vehicle on top, right? We had the opportunity to see a beam of light come down from the sky, which was completely dark, and light up an entire tree that was behind us.
Did it shine a spotlight?
A beam of light, just like in those science fiction movies. So many times when we look at science fiction, we think that all of that is just something from the imagination. I think there's a bit of reality to it, and people end up not revealing it and just leave it as fiction. But a lot of what used to be fiction, today we're living as reality. And you have to agree with me, Edson, that back in the day, I don't know if you're from that time, we used to watch Fantasy Island during the afternoon movie session.
Exactly.
There was Tattoo, there was that island full of glamour, full of everything, and we saw them answering a gigantic phone inside the car. That for us was a fable. That for us was simply a legend. Look, someone answering a phone inside the car, right?
And today it's a reality.
Phones today aren't really phones anymore, right? A phone is such an advanced computer that not even the computer used when man went to the moon could compare. I won't even say it comes close. I'll just say
To the little toe and the pinky toe.
to the little toe and pinky toe, right? That computer, which filled a whole block, didn't even have a gigabyte of memory. And today, an iPhone like the one that's filming us here, almost in total darkness, and you see such a wonderful image. It's a machine. You have a whole world inside here. So just imagine how much we've grown in technology. What used to be fiction has become reality. We don't have to look far, not at all. Back then, in the movie Star Trek, we used to see the crew on that ship using those computers, pressing those buttons. Today, there aren't even buttons anymore. Now everything is touchscreen, right? Things have changed so much. Soon, I won't need anything else.
Soon it'll just be our thoughts.
It'll be just our thoughts. They're already making holograms, things that used to be science fiction. So why am I bringing up this kind of conversation? Because we notice that the world is built on imagination. But this imagination, it has a certain validity in the concreteness of things, right? And who knows? Let's take a chance here and say that those people who did it back then, very carefully so we wouldn't get scared, maybe weren't someone who already existed here in our time. Who knows, maybe back then someone was already able to travel through time and bring information, of course, in a very subtle way so as not to scare the population, right? We can think about that possibility.
For sure. It's one more possibility of this totally unusual phenomenon that's present here in Barra do Garças. Regarding the luminous phenomenon, that's really clear to me because we also talked to other people who said they saw this phenomenon, but beings like that, right? Because every now and then someone talks about beings, they also mention maybe extraterrestrials, a civilization inside the Serra do Roncador. Is there any basis for that?
Here, people talk a lot about the extraterrestrial issue. They also talk about beings that could inhabit this other reality, which would be something at the center of the earth, but in another dimension. That's how people think about the intraterrestrial world issue. It's not something where you just go into a hole and come out there. No, you would have to.
If it were another dimension.
You would have to go through something to reach that dimension. Maybe that's the dream of Colonel Percy Fawcett, who passed through here in 1925 and was searching for a lost civilization he called Z, and he carried with him a black basalt statuette, a mysterious object that, according to him, would be a key granting access to the subterranean world. But speaking of this intraterrestrial matter, we have mysteries here, mysteries within the indigenous villages. I had the opportunity during the recording of Enigmas de Serra do Roncador to visit some villages. Among them, the region of Parabuburi, which is in the municipality of Campinapolis, about 200 kilometers from Barra do Garças. There is one of the largest concentrations of indigenous villages of the Zavante ethnicity in the Parabuburi region. And there are two very strange places there, places that awaken in you like a tremendous curiosity.
Extreme. I've even heard one of them is the Enchanted Lagoon, right?
Exactly. I'm talking about this lagoon, which they call the Sacred Lagoon. The indigenous people call it sacred, and the locals call it enchanted. And the bottomless cave, which is said to be inhabited by a being that they describe, the indigenous people, as bat people, who would be a kind of guardian that protects the villages. This lagoon in the 1990s. Mrs. Teresa Lochner was present there doing a vigil with her group of esoteric mystics, and they were at the edge of this lagoon. I'm giving you this image, it's an original image from that time. They were there performing their ritual when they started to head back to their tents, and Mrs. Teresa stayed there contemplating the evening. At the very end of the afternoon, beginning of the evening, they started to come out, as she says, and if you want to reproduce it, you can use her own words, which are in this video, small balls of fire that came out of the Lagoa Das.
From inside the lagoon, from the depths of the lagoon.
When suddenly she was surprised by a huge light that came out from the depths, which she calls a ship. What is this light that you are seeing and that she filmed? At the time, we're talking about 1999, there was little technology and it was a video home system camera, but you can clearly see how extraordinary this was. Chief Aniceto, he talks about this presence and he says that his ancestors used to say the following: before, that place was frequented by the indigenous people, but one day the indigenous women from that village were in the area looking for fruits from the Cerrado to take to their children and their husbands, when suddenly they saw in that lagoon with emerald green waters, which doesn't increase or decrease at any time of the year. It's always the same amount of water with that same color. I'm telling you because I'm a witness. I've been there in the summer and in the winter, and it's always the same. Gourds appeared floating on the water as if they were decorated gourds. The women couldn't resist and started jumping into the lagoon to try to grab those gourds, but they ended up being sucked to the bottom and never returned to their villages. From then on, the indigenous people became very afraid and stopped going to the lagoon. Today they consider it sacred and do not go there or bathe in it. But beyond that, a person who lives in the city of Campinapolis got curious and took a small boat to the middle of the lagoon. And there, with a spool, with a kind of steel cable, that thin line used to fish for pirarara. He wrapped a big stone and more than 200 meters of that steel cable, and it was released, with the stone pulling it to the bottom until the more than 200 meters ran out, and it kept pulling it down.
In other words, it was as if it was much deeper, way more than the 200 meters of the reel.
They call it the bottomless lagoon. And that too
might be an entrance, maybe, to this underground world. Has any indigenous person ever witnessed the luminous phenomenon in the lagoon?
Yes, just to add, in 2015, there was a group of Russian divers in that region who dove as deep as they could and still didn't find the bottom. One detail, in this lagoon you're seeing in these images, there's no life at all, not even small fish, minnows, or algae. Nothing, there's no life, and according to them, there's no bottom. But to answer your question about this matter, this lagoon is inspired by the indigenous people, and they are the ones who talk about the strange presence. And the indigenous people were careful to try to follow the light that came from the depths. So, according to Chief Zé Maria, he said in an interview on my show that he had the young indigenous people from Campana stay below that lagoon to find out how this happened. And in fact, the light came out from the depths and went toward the cave, which they call the bottomless cave. According to them, they traveled more than 3 kilometers in search of this light, which moved away as they got closer. And Chief Aniceto said that after they came out, they searched the entire upper part, looking for a supposed hole that would be a source of light to the center of the cave. And they didn't find anything. The light was actually deep inside the cave. So, the indigenous people believe that it's a portal from where? Where? They also think like that from where? The ships that vibrate in the inner world, that are in the inner world, they come out through that lagoon, they fly over that region. That his return would be in the cave.
In other words, there is an interrelation between the enchanted lagoon or the sacred lagoon and these caves and this supposed civilization that inhabits these depths. And the indigenous people, the Zavante, they have had an interaction for a long time, for millennia, let's say, with this phenomenon and with these beings who pilot these unidentified flying objects.
Yes, they firmly affirm this presence. In fact, the one who appears in the image is Chief Aniceto. He is one of the most respected leaders in this region of Parabuburi, and you can hear it here in his own words.
People went out to see, they looked all over up there and there was no hole. Then the same light came in again, just like the sun inside.
During our conversation, Aniceto talks about strange beings that inhabit the Great Cave, something he describes as a bat Indian.
He only comes out at night, visits the village like that.
Is he some kind of guardian for you?
That's right. He's our guardian. In the village itself, he visits every village. The Zavante believe only at night.
Continuing our conversation here, which is really interesting. Recently, I heard that you managed to get some videos here in the city as well, because every now and then the phenomenon shows up. Sometimes it stays still, sometimes it's moving, and they're large luminous objects. Tell us a little about that. When was the last time you filmed one?
Actually, the last object I filmed was just now, in the year 2024. It crossed the skies of Barra do Garças, causing a certain excitement among people. People who were at the colleges like Univar College, people who were in the Porto do Bahia area at Matriz Square also reported about this object. Because after I gave an interview to a local television channel, people started to speak out. I had the privilege of filming the object, this object that's appearing in your image here. But it's a recurring event in Barra do Garças, although it's very difficult to film it. I don't know if it's them who don't allow it, if it's them who hide, but one thing I can guarantee you, Edison, it's nothing conventional. It's nothing like what we're used to seeing, like a plane, a helicopter, a balloon, or a satellite. It's a phenomenon that comes, appears, shows itself, and then goes away. This has been happening.
A certain question just came to me. The Air Force, because we know that the Air Force, they research this phenomenon. Eventually, because Barra do Garças is a hub, a hotspot where this phenomenon happens, the Air Force has already been present here. Do you know anything about that?
Here in Barra do Garças, we have Sindacta 1, which is an airspace command center connected with other command centers throughout Brazil. And Sindacta 1 is, of course, a military area and involves military secrets. They are not simply going to say what they are seeing on their radars, obviously, so as not to cause any kind of panic among the population. But it's something that really draws a lot of attention. And I, as a journalist, have even had the opportunity to ask the Air Force commanders about the reason for these maneuvers. About the city of Barra do Garças, which is the following. At certain times of the year, now less frequently, we used to have intense fighter jet maneuvers over the skies of Barra do Garças. The Air Force base here is in the city of Anápolis, which is just over 400 kilometers from Barra do Garças. These planes, being supersonic, take about, in a straight line obviously, about 8 minutes to leave the Annapolis Air Force Base and reach Barra do Garças. So every now and then, Edson, you were at home having breakfast, having lunch, or in the afternoon watching television, and you were surprised by a boom over your house. That was the movement of a supersonic plane flying low over the city. Always the same information. 3 planes. This happened unexpectedly. The population had no knowledge of it. And then people would get scared. What's happening? Is there a war? What's going on? The fact is that when the Air Force commanders were asked, they always responded as follows. No, we are just conducting an electronic warfare simulation here. I ask you, what about the skies over Barra do Garças? If there are so many open places where they could perform this maneuver, if the airbase is there in Annapolis and near Brasilia there's also the Sindacta, then why over the skies of Barra do Garças? That's the question I leave you with. I don't have the answer, but the conspiracy theories, let's put it that way, and what people say off the record. Even Mr. Valdo Vahão, who is no longer with us, he said that some of the commanders even confided in him. Look, Valdo Vahão, don't put me in situations. This is a military secret. We can't reveal this to anyone.
And we are at the Valdo Vahão Cultural Center. And we're going to talk a little bit about futurism because it's a very relevant topic here in Barra Garças right now due to the phenomenology that happens here.